Baltimore Ravens wide receivers Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman continue to turn heads at OTAs, earning the praise of cornerback Nate Wiggins and others. We talk about that and so much more coming up next here on this Friday edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your shows. We're here for you 5 days a week, daily Ravens coverage, so Ravens news, analysis, updates, so much more. You're not missing out on any content whether you choose to watch or listen. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We return here. It is a Friday. Really appreciate everybody being here today. It's rounding out another week of Ravens content. The Ravens wrapped up their second week of OTAs yesterday. Week 1 obviously was last week. Week 3 coming up next week. So we're going to be talking about what happened at OTAs, getting to some week 2 takeaways. We're going to be getting into that more so in the final part of the show. Those are going to be more general takeaways. Over the course of the first 2 segments, first, want to talk about Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman continuing to turn heads at OTAs. Nate Wiggins provided a little bit of a lowdown, a little bit of a scouting report. So I want to talk about that in the first part of the show. We'll talk Wiggins, we'll talk Flowers, we'll talk Bateman. Seems like we've talked Bateman a lot this week, to be honest. But you know what? I think that's a good thing because everybody else in that organization, players, coaches, they're talking about him too. Lamar Jackson also remains absent from OTAs. We'll go over a bit of an absentee list for the Ravens so far, and at least for yesterday's OTAs to kind of go off of. Lamar was at the first session of OTAs last week, but then didn't end up being in any other ones so far. Maybe that changes next week, but there's been a lot of controversy about him not being there. John Harbaugh spoke about it, so we'll address it. Seems like we do every year, but we'll talk about it a little bit. And then again, the OTA week 2 takeaways in the final part of this show. So let's get into it. Zay Flowers, Rashod Bateman turning heads at OTAs. Now, Nate Wiggins took the media stand yesterday and was asked about the receiver that is the toughest to cover and the receiver that is the most fun to cover for the Ravens at OTA so far. Now, he said in terms of who's the most difficult, it's been Rashod Bateman for him. He said Rashod Bateman, he's shifty with a lot of quickness in the route. And then who's the most fun to guard? He said Zay because they met up in college, and he said that we both know that we're fast. Wiggins, we know, is fast, right? And obviously Zay is too. Those guys are speedy. Bateman, I think, has some underrated speed element to him as well. But it just feels like Zay and Rashod Bateman both have had good off seasons on the field, training and getting ready and just making sure that they're in the best shape they can be heading into this 2024 season. We know both guys are going to have huge roles. Now, Zay, if you were with me on Locked On Ravens, if you're an everydayer, first of all, thank you for tuning in each and every day. But if you were an everydayer, you heard me last year, one of my bold predictions was, you know what? Zay Flowers is going to take over this wide receiver 1 role by the end of the season. And then by the end of week 1, he was the wide receiver 1. So Zay's been in that role. For Rashod Bateman, he's also been a number 1 wide receiver, right? Remember that 2022 season? I talk about it here all the time on Locked On Ravens. I know it's not necessarily a fun or fond memory to go over, but Bateman was the number 1 receiver in 2022, went down with an injury. I had said that entire year Baltimore should have invested more, and they should have based off of the results. But every coach that's got up on that podium, every player that's got up on that podium has been asked about Rashod Bateman, at least on the offensive side of the ball, right? Been asked about Rashod Bateman, and the answers have been a bunch of praise, a bunch of belief, and I think that does help. And Rashod Bateman himself took the media stand and talked about it too. But it's nice to hear now, even on the defensive side of the ball, guys making sure that they're given their proper flowers, no pun intended, to Zay in his last name, but literally the flowers that both of those guys have earned. Zay's a shifty guy, right? I think Wiggins is a shifty corner. He's really fluid in his movements, but so is Zay. And I think that Wiggins is 1,000% telling the truth there, because feels like when we start to see some of those matchups, right, training camp and stadium practice, I think that seeing Bateman and Flowers go up against Nate Wiggins is going to be an absolutely amazing thing to watch. Now, for Bateman, we know he's a great route runner too. We know that he can be a 3-level receiver, but I think at least a bit more of a defined role, in my opinion, will probably be best for him. Plus, not having that competition looking over his shoulder like we've talked about here before in Odell Beckham Jr. So Bateman's a guy that has been working hard. He has made it very clear that he understands the situation he's in and the role that he's going to have this season. Both Flowers and Bateman, another thing that I really like, and based off of what they have told the media, based off what other players and coaches have told the media, both of those guys seem to be taking on more of a leadership role this year so far. And one of those answers actually came from wide receiver coach Greg Lewis, who, if we all know now, we should at this point, right? Malik Cunningham is switching from quarterback to wide receiver. And when he was asked about how is that transition going, he talked about Zay and Rashod and even like Sean Ryan and some other guys taking Cunningham under their wing to help him learn the position and get up to speed and get acclimated. This is a second-year guy we're talking about and a fourth-year guy, right? We know Nelson Aguilar is the vet in that room, 100%. Last year it was Beckham and Nelson Aguilar. This year it is just Nelson Aguilar in terms of guys who have plenty of veteran experience. So the Ravens are going to have to rely on some of these young guys to step up and take on, quote-unquote, veteran leadership roles, even if, you might say, oh, well, what? This guy's still so young. Why does he have to take on a role like that? It's because as an NFL career arc goes, you have to take on some of that leadership as you get acclimated to the league. Sometimes even rookies do it to an extent, but to see Zay and Rashod Bateman have that impact already, plus the fact that looks like Rashod Bateman got a little bigger during the offseason in terms of his body. It looks like his body, he added some muscle. Zay looks a little bit more muscular this season too, or this offseason. So feels like they're hopefully not going to lose any of that speed and shiftiness, especially Zay. But these two just continue to turn heads and make an impact. Now, obviously, where do you have to make the impact? It's on the field. Nobody cares about offseason impact, right? Catches in the offseason, they don't count. It counts for, I guess, something when you're talking about, hey, this guy's ready, this guy's not. Should we give him a bigger role? But we know that Zay's going to have a huge role. We know that Rashod Bateman's going to have a huge role. When it matters is on the football field. For Zay, he was on the football field. He was playing last year. But for Rashod Bateman, this kind of is what about this whole situation where for the Ravens, is he going to be able to stay on the field, right? Is he going to be able to play for the Ravens over the course of the year and play a full 17-game season? Because that's been some of the issue, right? Getting him and Lamar on the same page. And that's why when we talk about our second part of the show here with Lamar being absent, it's important for these guys to get as many reps in as they can. And Bateman just being healthy, I mean, even if it's not Lamar throwing to him, it's just about getting the reps in and staying healthy and almost like proving to himself that he can. It's been a very tumultuous time for him during his NFL career, being injured and having to deal with that, missing a bunch of time here, a little time there. But he and Zay Flowers actually complement each other very well. It's just a matter of getting both guys in rhythm at the same time. It felt like Flowers was in rhythm for most of the season last year, but it felt like Bateman never really could catch on and could never really follow. And part of that has to do with the fact that Baltimore, again, I've been hammering this point home all week, Baltimore did not pass the ball a lot last year. First in rushing attempts, 30th in passing attempts. I would expect and I would hope to see more balance out of this Todd Monken offense this upcoming year, because a lot of it, too, is you have to get targets in order to get into a rhythm. Zay was getting a lot. If your name is Marquise Brown, if your name is Mark Andrews, if your name is Zay Flowers, you have a pretty good shot to get 9-10 targets a game. If your name is anybody else, it hasn't really been that way. Lamar has gotten better at spreading the ball out, but I do think that if the offense is more balanced, it's just more opportunities to go around where you're not going to see every single game. It's, Rashod Bateman had 3 catches for 31 yards or 2 catches for 27 yards. Because that's what we saw a lot with both him and Odell Beckham Jr., right? So in my opinion, it's going to be really interesting For those two guys, both Zay and Rashod Bateman, they are your unquestioned number one and number twos, and they're going to have to play like it if Baltimore is going to have a shot to win a Super Bowl this season. Coming up in the second part of the show, we're going to be talking a bit about Lamar Jackson, his absence from OTAs. Should we be worried? Should we not be? Stay tuned. We got a lot to get to on the show. First, the show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has it covered. With over 120 million parts, your number one ride or die will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So the price you need to the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible as well. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. We're back our second segment of Locked On Ravens here on Purple Friday. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. Really appreciate everybody for making Locked On Ravens a part of your day. Again, the support has been incredible on this show. Be sure to also check out Locked On Sports Today for the biggest stories across all of sports. We have a lot going on the Locked On Podcast Network, and be sure to check out Peter Bukowski over at Locked On Sports Today. Let's get into Lamar Jackson a little bit. He's been absent from OTAs, obviously showed up to the first part of the first week, but has not been in Baltimore ever since. This is a non-point to me. I know a lot of people are worried about it. I know a lot of people are, I've seen some people get angry at Lamar Jackson over this. This is not something to worry about, in my opinion. John Harbaugh commented on it, said this is the voluntary part. He's, doesn't have anything on the guys who weren't there. That's how it should be. Now, I would prefer Lamar to be there. The organization would prefer Lamar to be there. Everybody would prefer Lamar to be there, right? I think almost anybody would. But it's within his right. This is voluntary. And to me, I don't feel like making such a huge deal out of it. He's not making a huge deal of it. The team isn't as well. Like going back to the first part of the show with Rashod Bateman. Yes, it would be incredible if both he and Bateman and Lamar got on the same page together and were able to get as many reps as possible heading into the season. But I don't know. It feels like, for any of these guys, Lamar's not the only vet not reporting. I'll pull up the practice report here quickly in terms of guys that were not at practice. Some guys are injured. We know Lamar is not, but I'm just saying for context, some guys are injured. Some guys are just not choosing to participate on their own right. So Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Keaton Mitchell, Justice Hill, Deontay Hardy, Mark Andrews, Adisa Isaac, Kyle Van Noy, and then you have Bo Braid, Arthur Millette, Kyle Hamilton, Trayvon Mullen, Marcus Williams, Marlon Humphrey, Michael Pierce, Rashad Nichols, and Justin Madubuike. So obviously some of those guys are injured, and that's the reason they are not with the team right now. Keaton Mitchell obviously being one of them, Bo Braid, Adisa Isaac. Those guys are all injured. So that's one thing. But then you have vets who just aren't there, right? You have vets that aren't showing up, and that is the nature of voluntary. Once you hit mandatory, if guys aren't showing up for mandatory minicamp, training camp, that's where it becomes a massive, massive issue. But for Lamar, again, would I prefer for him to be there versus not? Absolutely. I prefer for every single player to be there. And again, the Ravens would also prefer that. The part of this is going in, working with your coaches, working with your teammates, just making sure everybody can be on the same page. And I'm not saying that guys showing up to OTAs wins them the Super Bowl. I'm not saying that guys not showing up makes it that their season is going to be a failure. It really doesn't have that much effect on anything in the grand scheme of things. It's just getting started earlier, which it's beneficial, right? I think it's more beneficial than not to be there with your teammates and your coaches. But again, the word voluntary is the one that speaks volumes here. Lamar doesn't have to be there. When you hit mandatory, Lamar has to be there, and he will. He will. Other guys have their own training regimens that they do with their own team, right? So there are a bunch of different reasons for guys not being there, and I assume, this is just me assuming, that most of the guys who are not there are still working out on their own time with their team, getting work in, and we'll see. Maybe some of these guys come back for the final week. I mean, Derrick Henry obviously was there and practicing during the first part of OTAs, so and it was a massive deal. Everybody was making a really big deal about it. But in my opinion, the Ravens have this whole situation ahead of them where they're going to have plenty of opportunities to be sure that everybody's on the same page, get everybody into meetings, get everybody reps and onto the field, and making sure that everybody has their role figured out. And what's that going to look like? So in my opinion, this is a non-point to me. It's not a huge deal. It's not what I would prefer, but it would be a much bigger storyline if Lamar was still undergoing his contract situation, right? I think we talked a lot about him not showing up for workouts before his contract was signed. And what message was it sending? Is it contract related? Is it this? Is it that? And that was exhausting. I still remember that offseason of every single day being that offseason. Literally, I did not know free agency was starting the week it did. I mean, quite literally, it was, I think, Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening. And I'm like, when does free agency start? Because I had been talking about Lamar every single day for like a month straight, or at least 3 weeks straight, because that contract situation was the biggest storyline in Baltimore. And free agency literally was the next day. And I was like, when's free agency start? That's kind of, I'm interested to know, when does free agency start? And hey, lo and behold, started the next day. And so I missed out on all my offseason content I wanted to do. And it was frustrating, and just for a lot of people. I'm not even saying for myself, but just it was frustrating for a lot of people to have to go through that whole situation. I mean, it was frustrating for Lamar, it's frustrating for the organization, frustrating for everybody involved. But this is not that. There's no underlying meaning to this. There's nothing of the sort. I saw a couple of people on social media being like, "Oh, what is Lamar saying by missing OTAs?" And I mean, it doesn't mean anything. He's still a leader, still somebody that's going to show up, working hard by himself. But I'm not going to go and try to cook up any theories that aren't true, right? In my opinion, this is something that for the Ravens, it's just a matter of being able to get as many guys there as you can, get guys reps, and plus I know it's not really a silver lining, but if you had to make a silver lining, some of these vets not being there does open up opportunities for other guys to get one-on-one work with the coaches and I guess like more attention per se, working with some of the ones as opposed to working with threes or fours. So younger guys getting opportunities, guys buried on the depth chart getting more opportunities. So some of the starters that are already there. So it is an opportunity in that way. But of course, as I said, you do prefer everybody you can get there to be there, because I do think it benefits everybody if that ends up being the case. So again, not a point to me for Lamar Jackson. It's fine, not preferred, but fine. Not going to dock him for it. The word voluntary is there. That's what we're going with. If it's mandatory, it's a different story. But for now, the word still remains voluntary. But coming up with the final part of the show, we'll talk about some week 2 takeaways from OTAs and a lot more. Stay tuned. Plenty to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. We are back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Friday. Again, thank you so much for being here today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. Free and available as always on podcasting platforms. So if you'd like to watch on YouTube in video form, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, it's the same show, so you can follow along, subscribe over there as well. We have a lot of great communities here: video, audio, social media, subtext. It's been great hosting the show. Almost 5 years now. This is episode 1,260 consecutively for me. Holidays, weekends, whatever you name it. Locked On Ravens does not stop, and I do not sleep. I'm recording this very late, later than I'd like to admit, to be honest. But you know what? The show goes on. Locked On Ravens continues no matter what. So let's now get into a practice report. Ryan Mink does a great job of BaltimoreRavens.com as the editorial director, putting together these notes after workouts. So from yesterday's practice, obviously we know that Nate Wiggins had high praise for Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman, made a huge deal about that. But Trey Swilling has broken out at the safety position here. He's put himself on the map. He broke up a pass over the middle for Zay Flowers, had tight coverage on back-to-back incompletions to Isaiah Likely and Charlie Kolar as well. Now Kolar did get open behind Trey Swilling as well for a late touchdown in practice. So good to see Charlie Kolar get some action and make some plays. I think, look, everybody's so focused on Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. I really do think that for Baltimore, Charlie Kolar being a third tight end and someone who you can put in as either a change of pace guy or a chess piece, that could be a very underrated aspect of what Baltimore's offense does this season. Now, Devontae Walker had maybe his best practice yet, according to Ryan, saying that he grabbed a red zone touchdown and made a nice intermediate catch despite tight coverage and ended up, I think it was a hurry up drill at the end of practice. So we know Tez Walker has that 6'1", 6'2 frames, like anywhere from 6 feet to 6'2". And he's somebody who's a jump ball player. We talked a lot before the draft. If you're an everydayer, you know this. We absolutely talked about it almost every day, about how Baltimore needed a specific skill set at wide receiver in the draft if they were going to take one. And Devontae Walker is that. Now, the added bonus to Devontae Walker is the speed. The speed is something. 4.36. He's gotten a lot of comparisons to Torrey Smith over the course of his, about a month now in Baltimore. Feels like it's been both forever and yesterday since the draft happened. But again, he's a player that is not going to get a huge roll off of the bat, but they could cook up specific packages for him because they do need that skill set in their wide receiver room. So I wouldn't be shocked if they do give him some sort of role, but at the same time, they're going to have to figure out how they want to use both Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews in the offense together. And does that take away wide receiver snaps if they're using a bunch of 2 tight end sets and putting Likely out wide or putting Andrews out wide? So that is one interesting aspect of this whole thing as well. Now, Rodarius Washington, who haven't heard his name a lot, made an interception off a pass over the middle that hit off Tylan Wallace's back, popped into the air. But also he made a mistake smashing into Owen Wright after he made a catch in the flats, apparently. So I don't really know what that one means. I guess Owen Wright might have flattened him over. I don't necessarily know what that means, but Washington's a player that I expect to maybe be like an underrated aspect of their defense this season. Obviously, in the slot, they have Arthur Millette, but I would expect Washington to maybe be the backup slot corner. Pepe Williams is also there, but I think that might be a battle. He can also play safety, came out of TCU as a safety, was highly regarded. For those who don't know, he was regarded as a 3rd-round pick or day 2 pick, early day 3 pick coming out of college, but went undrafted largely due to size concerns. And he's a talented player. I'd expect the Ravens to try to use him in a lot of different ways this year. Sanusi Kane had an interception against Devin Leary, so 6th-round pick was gotten the better of by the 7th-round pick here. Pepe Williams also had an interception late in practice. A lot of interceptions here. Adafe Owe, who Ryan said was a menace, both in the run game and pass game during OTAs on Tuesday, apparently had a play sniffing out a running back to force a spiked incompletion and also had some strong pass rushes as well. But Ronnie Stanley, he had a good practice too with some nice pass blocks on Owe, according to Ryan. Aguilar had his first OTA appearance and had one long catch. Could have gone for a touchdown in a real game, according to Ryan. You also have Broderick Washington, might have had a sack coming off of the edge. And you also have a situation here whether one hurry-up drill at the end of practice ended with a long touchdown because Jalen Armour-Davis could have had a sack on that play. But obviously we know you're not hitting guys and taking guys down for sacks during training camp, during OTAs, during minicamp. None of that happened. So probably some debate there in terms of how the practice actually ended. So a lot of positives there from Ryan's report. I think for me, one of the names that I really want to keep an eye on this season is Broderick Washington. Signed that extension towards the end of last offseason. Didn't necessarily have a great year in terms of expectations. Obviously, it was Justin Madubuike who broke out in a huge way. But he's someone that I do think will contribute a bit more. I think the Ravens will try to keep Michael Pierce and Brent Urban a little more fresh this season. Not that they didn't last year, but obviously they're both a year older now. So the young guys, I mean, my pick for breakout player of the year is Travis Jones. I haven't been hiding that, but it's going to be imperative that Justin Madubuike continues to build off of his breakout year from last year. That Travis Jones breaks out and that Broderick Washington is able to be a solid, steady contributor. And a player that also I'm very intrigued by is, in my opinion, I think that we talked about Charlie Kolar a little bit, but in terms of the wide receiver room, I mentioned Nelson Aguilar there. What's his role going to be? Because he was the 4th wide receiver last year, and that was behind Zay Flowers, Rashod Bateman, and Odell Beckham Jr. He moves up to be the number 3 guy, and if there's an injury, he's going to be number 2. Aguilar was awesome for the Ravens last year, both as a veteran guy, off the field leadership. Seemed to me, I mean, I compare him to Kyle Van Noy. He was the Kyle Van Noy of the defense. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, seemed like Van Noy was always in the right spot at the right time, made the big play when the Ravens needed it. And for the Ravens on defense, Van Noy did a lot of that for them. On the offensive side of the ball, it felt like that was Nelson Aguilar in a lot of different situations. Ball gets tipped up in the air. Nelson Aguilar is right there to come down with it. Need a big first down. Nelson Aguilar is right there to come down with the catch. So in my opinion, Baltimore, there's so much that they can do with their offense this season, so much potential for what they can do with their offense. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to how these guys can contribute on a weekly basis. And look, it doesn't always have to be Zay Flowers every week. It doesn't always have to be Rashod Bateman. You can have guys like Nelson Aguilar step up and make sure that no one guy has the big burden of being the contributor each and every week. And that to me is why depth is so important. Veterans, young guys stepping up and being one. That's what makes an offense an offense. Everybody stepping up and contributing in the right way. So it's good that the Ravens are having these reps. Good that Baltimore's getting their practice in. Of course, as we look ahead to week 3 of OTAs, again, who's going to be there is probably going to be the biggest storyline. Obviously, that starts with Lamar, but whoever's there is there. And again, if he's not there, gives other opportunities to guys like Devin Leary, etc. And it's the same thing across the board with all the other different positions. So we'll see if Baltimore does anything over the weekend in terms of veteran signings. I mean, they haven't made one since the draft. Well, they made a couple defensive lineman signings, but no quote unquote big ones. So again, I might be more inclined to say that Baltimore would make one of those moves after OTAs concludes. Maybe not. They could, but I'd be, and I've been on record saying this, I'd be pretty shocked if the Ravens didn't add anybody to their roster before the start of the season in terms of like a big signing. Like what would that, who would that be? A Justin Simmons type player, Michael Thomas type player, someone of that nature. And we don't know who's going to be available. Maybe guys get cut. Maybe there's a guy who becomes available in a trade that we don't know about right now. And then we have that conversation. So Ravens will wrap up their OTAs next week. We will see how the Ravens end up going about and everything that goes on with them over the course of that week. And then mandatory minicamp will pop up, and then there'll be a little break before training camp. So we're checking off that list, right? The checklist, step after step after step. Baltimore is getting closer, inching closer to that 2024 regular season. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure again to subscribe, follow along, video form and audio form. We'll take a 2-day break here on Locked On Ravens. Coming back on Monday with more Ravens content. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here on Monday on Locked On Ravens.